Hello! Today we've got a box from BetaFPV, but just before we get into that, a quick reminder, please like or dislike this video if you didn't like it, comment down below, don't forget to subscribe, and if you can find it, click on that little bell icon, it'll tell you when I'm uploading stuff. What have we got in here? It's a little radio. It's called the BetaFPV Lite Radio 2. Let's get out the box and see what we got, because all I can see right now is reflection from the whiteness. In the box you have user manual, QR codes, little quick guide, and the radio itself, which looks like this. It feels very much sort of around Xbox controller size. Here's an Xbox controller, quite similar. Ergonomically a little bit different, but quite similar. Now, the reason I was so interested in this one is because A, it's fairly cheap, B, it's got proper gimbals, and these feel quite reasonable, quite nice actually. C, it's got a USB port and you could use it as a simulator, and I'm developing a simulator. You didn't know? Look, here's a link up here. Many people who are coming over from using game controllers, which don't work so well because their sticks are so small and wiggly, are saying, well, what should I get? And there's a couple of cheap radios, but this seems like a really easy step on from a regular game controller because it's not too different. This one also will talk D8 and D16, so you can use it to fly stuff. Now, I don't think the range of it is like full range, like, you know, a proper radio, but in terms of, you know, flying your whoops and stuff, I figured this is really nice because, again, it's small, it's portable, something you can stick in throw in a bag with a couple of whoops and go along and fly it. Also, it runs OpenTX, although you will notice there's no display or anything, so how do you set it up? The answer to that is I don't know. Also, I've just taken it out of the box, and there's a bit of a shaky thing, so I need to find out what that is. But there are, at the back here, there's a little button that says setup and one that says bind. So, yeah, where's the shaking coming from? Well, having taken the battery bay off, I thought the answer was going to be this battery, but there's still a little bit of a rattle there, so I think we're going to have to crack this thing open, unless I can find something in the instructions to say what it is. So, bear with me, let's find out what's going on. Okay, so the answer to this rattle question was this thing here. You see we've got the little weight here. On here, this had come away and it was just rattling around. Obviously, it's to give it a bit more of an impression of weight. People don't like things if they're too light and plasticky, and this had just come away during the shipping, so I'll just stick that back down. But usefully here, it lets us look at the internals of the radio itself. Not sure if you can swap this out from mode 1 to mode 2. I guess you can, maybe. I'm not going to look at that. But you do have a couple of screws here which take off the tension on the stick. The throttle stick for me was a little bit tight, so I've just undone this just a little bit to just make it a bit looser for myself. But I'll get this stuck back down and put it back together so we can see what's what. But no, there was another noise. If you can hear that, there's a little haptic motor which is supposed to just give a little vibration as it starts up and stops, but this was vibrating as well, so I opened it up again to find it. And what you've got under here, you can see the motor is kind of here floating around, and it should be here in that little recess. So once again, I don't know what's happened to the package, but it looks like the adhesive has come loose and that's fallen out, so I just stuck that back down and sealed the radio all back up again. Finally, it felt secure. So I just wanted to show you a little bit more about the radio close up, and look, I had to switch to my grey background because it's white and white on white doesn't really work. So here's the radio as described before, and as I showed you, there is a battery here, and it comes with this 350 milliamp 2-cell battery, and it plugs in via the balance connector there. It would have been useful not to have that XT30 attached. It's a little big, and you need to squish it down properly essentially, but yeah, it all goes in there fine. Now, it doesn't just have a battery in there, it has a charging circuit. So if you plug a 5-volt supply into the USB connection, you will see we get a red LED. I can't see it particularly well under this light, and that means it's charging. What you've also got here is your normal sort of trainer port, so you can set this up as a trainer radio. This would be sort of the student version of it, and you'd have a proper radio on the other side, of course, for setup. And then you've got 4 switches, A, B, C and D. And you've got on the ends here, these are 2 2-position switches, and these ones, midpoints, are 3-position switches. And it sort of goes, you've got your normal 4 channels here, and then it's 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's how it's set up. So when you turn on, you get that little buzz on the motor, and you'll see a flash of purple there.
This is 3 flashes. Now this can speak 3 different FrSky protocols. The default, which is 1 flash of the purple, means it's talking D16 FCC. If it flashes twice, it's D16 with the LBT version, and if it's 3 times, which I've set this up for at the moment, it's FrSky D8. Now you can change this over by using this bind button on the back. Weirdly, this setup button, as far as I can tell, doesn't seem to do anything. It's just bind that does stuff, which is odd. So to change that, what we have to do is first turn it off, hold down the bind button. It's sort of recessed, so you have to do it with something like a flat end of a screwdriver. Then we are pressing till we power up, we let go, we keep the bind held in, and then we let go. And that's gone into bind mode. So let me turn that on again, see if that's worked. Because the instructions on this one were a little bit confusing. Let's see if that's worked. So turn on, goes green, 1 flash of purple. That means it's in D16 FCC. Now if you want to bind, with it already turned on, you press the bind button and you'll get this flashing purple, and it will flash for about 10 seconds. So best to put your model in bind, then put this in bind, and they should bind together that way. So that's the close-up. What I'm going to do now is plug it in via USB to see how it works as a simulator, and then we'll look at connecting this to a model, because obviously one of the things we don't have is any settings here. How do we set the endpoints and midpoints, which is important. Stuff like the mode are easy to set up because we've got these already assigned to channels. But yeah, it'd be interesting just to go through that, and then we can see how it flies. As far as I know, this just supports 1 model. So the thinking I have in this is you would have this as maybe a generic sort of, it's for an SPI quad, and if you have like multiple whoops all on SPI, you can use this radio to do each of them, and you just set them up all the same, so it wouldn't matter when you switched it out. But let's try this on a sim first and see how it looks.
Well, here we are. I've got the radio, I've got my sim up. Obviously I'm using my sim because I made it, but if it works on mine, it should work on Velocidrone, Liftoff, etc., everything else pretty much, because they all kind of work in terms of this will represent itself to the operating system as a joystick. So I'm going to go to my radio joystick setting, and I'm going to plug it in. Now I've already gone through and reassigned some controls, but basically you plug in, you should find that after a second or two the joystick's detected. This is detected as a BetaFPV Tyrannus joystick. I didn't need to calibrate. What I did do is map my controls, and the reason I did that is because this was like channel 5, 6, 7, 8, it meant that on the radio debug basically I had to move my flip out. So if you see here, you see reset there as axis 4, axis 5, channel 6, channel 7, and then channel 8 is flip, and my other sticks are all good. Seems very responsive. So let's jump in. I set dead zone down to 0, there's no drift, and it's much more responsive like that. I've turned the sound off in this, I've put my stick overlay on so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to have a quick fly around essentially. Which is, again, it feels really nice. The sticks are slightly shorter. I had a look and compared this, in fact, where is it? To my Tyrannus X Lite, which is a similar sort of thing. And I had problems with this originally because the sticks were a little bit short and caused me to move a bit more. Now on this, the sticks are short, but there is plenty of travel on the gimbals, which seems to make it work pretty well. So far on the sim, no problems on control. I notice my spin is slightly faster, so I can get to the edge of that quicker, but this is a minute or two readjustment. So in terms of doing my normal maneuvers and stuff, not a problem at all. It feels pretty natural. If we try do the old reverse spinny thing up the tower, that's all good there. Let's try the old front flip over here. I will get better at those eventually. All feels quite nice, and there's no problems with getting the right sort of finesse to do little adjustments, like if you're doing things like following a plane, as I am here, or going through sort of tight gaps. So yeah, certainly passes the simulator test. Quite impressed with the sticks. even though the sticks aren't the length they are, there seems to be a lot of trouble, so especially up and down. My thumb has to work quite a way to get down, and that seems to work quite well. But what I'll do next is hook it up to an actual quad, and we'll see how I can fly that. Are the sticks going to be okay for that? Okay, so I'm in BetaFlight here, and I've just plugged in a little what are you? I've just plugged in a little Emacs Tiny Hawk. Is it the Tiny Hawk Plus or something? I can't remember. It's what I had lying around, and it's one of the obvious quads I use to test indoors. So first off, what I want to do is do a bind of this, which in this particular version of BetaFlight is bind RX SPI, and I'm just going to put the controller into bind, hit the bind on there, and let's try saving that and see what we get. So if we connect back in, we go to receiver now. Okay, roll is good, pitch is good, yaw is good, throttle's good. Good stuff there, but you will notice, especially the roll, the minimum endpoint and the max endpoints are out. The sub trim is slightly out. You can see that it doesn't really come back to center as nicely as I would like it to. If we go down and let go 1500, oh, the pitch is good. Let's have a look at yaw a second. Yaw's pretty good. Roll's a bit more vague. It's, you know, there's a certain amount of deadband in there we'll have to apply, I think. Which is interesting because I wasn't getting any drift at all in the sim. But looking at this, there is a drift of up to about, I'd say there's like a 5 or 6 point deadband in that one we'll need to set up. I'm going to whop that up to like 6 just to be safe. And we can see we've got our auxes doing stuff. So obviously what we'll have to do is go in and set our modes to how we want to. For example, at the moment this was set completely differently, so I'll do that. But of course the big deal is about what we actually do in order to set up these endpoints, and this is where the story gets slightly more interesting. So to set the radio up with a quad so the endpoints are right, what you'll need to do is go to the support.betafpv.com site, and from there is a bit about the radio. There's the normal manual you get, and then what you get this thing called a Light Radio Configuration OpenTX Companion. So you see that the Light Radio runs OpenTX 224, and in order to get yourself the right companion for it, you'll need to download it from here. So what BetaFPV have done is they've gone ahead and they forked the GitHub repository for OpenTX, and they've basically made their own version that will work with the little light. So if you go into companion, there is a companion Windows target there. Unfortunately for me, where I run on a Mac, there isn't a Mac version or indeed a Linux version for Linux people. I did ask them about this, I didn't get a response, but for now you'd have to get the Windows version. And then, helpfully enough, aside from it says, like, you know, how to do some stuff, it's got a thing about how to actually trim the values. And what it's all about doing is getting the measurement of what your sticks are doing, and then sort of doing a little calculation to work out what the midpoint should be, so you can kind of trim it that way. So let's go ahead and do that now. Well, finally there was a reason for that setup button, and it's to put it in kind of firmware mode for connecting to the OpenTX companion it bundles. So here's my Windows 10 virtual machine, and if I try and read the models having just connected that up, there we go, we get something. Just one model, and it's not going to look particularly exciting because there's not a lot we could do with it. You know, we could go in and presumably we could set stuff up and change things along. But what the guide says is to go into edit radio settings, go into calibration, and then start doing weird calculations to work out what it thinks that the calibrated value should be or something. I'm going to work through this and see how it's set up, and I'll show you the differences I get. So at the moment they are set here, which is pretty weird anyway. I don't know what positive span and negative span means, but it doesn't look anything like 1000, 1500 and 2000 that you might expect, does it? So Yeah, odd, but we'll see if we can figure it out. Now what I did, I took a screenshot of my BetaFPV Lite sort of midpoint values because you have to use these. In fact, the roll was flickering about and I took the average of about 1510. And what you're supposed to do is take that figure you had as the calibrated value back in the Open Companion, which was 1014, and then add it to this figure you've got, 1510, take away 1500, which is the BetaFPV Lite, should be the midpoint, multiply that by 2 where you get minus 20, and then add the two together. So we get 1014 minus 20, which equals 994, and then you're supposed to put that back in. However, I would say don't bother with this. It's fiddly and I still had to mess around. I'll explain why in this next section. Okay, well, here's what I finished up with, and at the end of the day that roll stick is just a little bit inaccurate and goes back where it wants to go back to. What we didn't fix though using their little calculation is the endpoints. Now I've gone and fixed them, but I've sort of gone off book here in what I think is the sort of sensible things to do. I'll show you exactly what I did, so if you get this you have the option of doing the same thing to get things more accurate on your endpoints. So if we go back into OpenTX and read this, you will see that I made one little change on the aileron thing there. Did that get me what I wanted to? It was hard to tell because that stick was still wobbling about a bit. The main thing I did to mess with the endpoint, which is practically what I would have done with the radio, I went onto here and I looked at the sub-trim and the min-max points. Now this was a bit of a manual task to figure it out, but what was happening is the points were at least the same. So it was reading 1012 at the end point and 994 at the low point. It slightly changed on the aileron channel because we did that recalibration effectively there, but the rest of them I just went back and forth changing this bit by bit until I got the right thing, and that gave me a more accurate reading. It was a pain in the butt to do, but I don't have to come back and do it again at least. At the end of the day, if you miss this off and you were talking about 10 or 12 USECs, it's not an amazing amount. It's a tiny little bit that you could not distinguish between your thumb, but I like to try and get things as accurate as possible, and I also wanted to see how I could do it, and this is how I did it, basically using what I was using the radio but using the OpenTX version. Any changes you do in this, of course, don't forget to hit this button again, which writes your changes back to the radio. And so what I'm suggesting you might think about doing with your sub-trims is use this instead of using that weird calculation, which may or may not help. I'm not completely sure. It's a bit of trial and error, but if you're going to set up your endpoints properly anyway, you'll still need to go through this, so you might as well do your sub-trims at the same time. So I got a battery, well, I say I got a battery charged. I got a battery a little bit charged. You can see it wasn't charged up all the way, just to do a test flight. And yeah, everything was really quite good. Despite that stick I've got not quite centering properly, obviously when you hold it, you're much more in control, and so didn't feel any drift. Not getting a particularly nice picture here. I think the Wi-Fi router's really going at it today with 3 people all putting out loads of Wi-Fi signals. The RSSI gets pretty low, but it's an SPI receiver. That's pretty much what you get. But I am flying up in my room through several brick walls. We're managing to get the signal down here and not falling out of the sky. I must remember I've put that fence panel there. It's really in the way of trying to get the best range I can. But yeah, this worked basically the same as any other radio. I think the weak point in when you fly one of these little whoops is your SPI receiver, and I don't know if you can fix that by whacking up the radio power, but this did an absolutely fine job. Felt very normal, very natural, just like flying any of my other radios. So yeah, pretty impressed, and it got a good signal and feels pretty nice in my hands. So despite some awkward setup issues and basically the postman playing football with it presumably in order for those things to fall about and come loose, all now sorted, this ended up being really quite nice. I wasn't expecting too much out of it because it's fairly cheap, but the gimbals are really good, and despite that aileron stick seeming not to centre properly, had no drift in my sim and nothing when we flew the actual quad, and I think that's because when you've actually got your thumb on it, you're generally getting a little bit of jitter anyway because you can't keep your phone absolutely still. But certainly it would have been nicer if it would centre lovely and not jitter about quite as much. There's a lot about this I really like. I like the fact it came with a battery and that you've got a charge port and all the channels are already set up. It's ideal for somebody who's sort of coming into the hobby but doesn't want to jump in all the way, if you know what I mean. So if you're starting with a simulator, this is like infinitely better than using a game controller. As much as these are great for like Halo and stuff, as soon as you're getting onto flying stuff, they really do have their limitations, and these proper sticks with lots of throw really do help that way. As far as flying actual models go, I would restrict them to a sort of whoop, the indoor style quad, like what I was flying. Again, if you're just getting into the hobby and getting into FPV, this is quite a nice place to start. Now, I don't know what the range is like on this. Certainly, these don't go very far anyway because they don't have full range receivers. Don't get fooled into thinking it hasn't got an antenna on the end, so it can't go that far, because neither does this X-Lite, and it goes an amazing range. But that said, I don't think I'd be comfortable flying 5-inch quads with it because I need all my setup options to do things, and that's why I think this is an excellent little whoop controller, but I don't think I'd use it for anything else. But I'd like to test the range at some point once lockdown finishes and I can actually go somewhere. It'd be interesting to see how this holds up, and I can always just look at the RSSI and decide whether it's going to start to go quickly or not. So the only issue, of course, it won't grow with you. It's got a single model memory, it's got difficult setup options, but for what it does very nicely, and obviously I love it for the sims. So for people that are using a game controller on a sim at the moment and want a better experience, something like this, which is going to feel very similar but have lovely sticks and get a much better experience, is ideal. The only thing I'd say is if you're going to continue on and get a whole bunch of bigger quads, you're going to grow out of this fairly quickly, and that's when you'll need something a little bit more configurable. But like I said, for your indoor quads, for flying your whoops, for stuff like that, really good. Recommended. So this has been the BetaFPV Lite 2 radio and was kindly supplied for review by BetaFPV, and if you check the links down below you can find out where to check it out in more detail. Hope that's helpful, and until next time, catch you later. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.